when I see somebody demonstrating autonomy and creativity and ownership of whatever assignment they have, and often stretching beyond just the singular task you gave them, that usually shows me like they feel confident and they're ready. They're ready to go.
Welcome to the Unleashing Leaders podcast, where we work with willing leaders to accelerate the changes you seek. We'll learn from the experiences of different leaders facing real challenges and distill practical, purposeful steps to apply in your context. I'm Lee Scott, your curious co-pilot. Together, let's make positive changes for our companies and communities. Today, we have a great topic that is going to be relevant to, if not everybody, nearly everybody that has been following the show for any length of time. Our topic today is how to prioritize and handle with grace conflicting task requests. You've got multiple projects, multiple clients, multiple things going on in your life, personally and professionally. What are some ways not to do that? What are some ways that you can do that with a little more grace and a little bit more of your sanity and your reputation left intact? To have this conversation, I am joined by two of our top trusted change agents from Unleashing Leaders, who are going to be walking us through some examples of how they model the way and the way that they handle their client work and their personal commitments in their lives, and share some practical tips from a standard operating procedure that we use internally with you as our listeners. So I am joined by Skye Connors. She is a member of our executive management team. She is a engagement manager, a practice lead for our business process innovation family, and she is one of our senior people managers who looks after many of our change agents in our firm across multiple accounts. Skye, it is great to have you on the show.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Yeah. And Scott, we're going to get a little bit more Skye's background in just a moment. We're also joined by Emily LaPorta, who is also is a senior business process architect. She and Skye work on some of the same accounts, but also stripe across multiple accounts. So they themselves are in a situation where they're like, hey, who's on first and who's on second? And also living a full and busy life outside of work and juggling various personal commitments, including that little thing that just happened recently with the wedding. I don't know. I guess apparently that's a thing that needs to be planned and managed, almost like an account, right, Emily? And Emily is also juggling across multiple accounts. So these two, and Emily and Skye, put together our internal SOP, standard operating procedure, for how to reconcile when you've got multiple clients and multiple, customers and projects competing for your time. So thought two great guests to have on the show. We haven't had two guests at the same time. So I'm going to do my best to kind of juggle the amount of talent that is coming through on this. So let's jump in a little bit. We'll start with you, Skye. Could you tell our listeners a little bit about when did you first kind of realize that life was not single threaded? Like you're going to need to be able to juggle, pat your head and rub your belly at the same time. When did that first start showing up for you in your career?
Yeah, I started out in a call center when I was about 20 years old for one of the top managed healthcare plans. And it was very quickly recognized that you have to be able to juggle and carry multiple loads at one time. So we would often be, taking a phone call, closing out a prior case, working on, maybe a resolution for something that required some level of collaboration outside of my unit, to resolve. And then be able to quickly get back into your next call. And so it was a multitude of things that you were doing at one time, always, and all day long for your entire
All
shift.
day long.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you would even think that in that situation, you're like, oh, you're in a call center. So you have one customer at a time and it's just that customer. But I think if any of us have ever called into a call center, you realize usually you're not the only one they're talking to, and now we have chats that's happening in parallel and everything else. So yeah, that is that's a learning through fire kind of experience. And then we'll talk more about how you're juggling it today. But thank you for that intro, a little bit of your background, Skye. And then Emily, how about for you? When did you start realizing that, man, you were going to have multiple bogeys coming at you at the same time to keep on radar?
Yeah, probably later than I should have. It's funny, I remember it was my first remember specifically the instance where I wish that I would have had the standard operating procedure. So it was my first corporate job or somewhere along there. I think I was about 23 or 24, kind of matters. And I just remember I was really good at my job. I was working in human resources and getting commitments and things to employees. And I was so good, I was so fast, and you could always count on me to get back the thing that I said that I'd get to you when I said I'd get to you. And I really prided myself in that, and it was that's how I know I'm successful. I said I'd do a thing and I did that thing. And I remember the exact, like, I probably could have had it written down in a calendar or something like that, where I told someone I'd do something. It's in a diary for sure. And then I got to the end of the day and, two new priorities. There's an emergency and, this is going on and this has to happen. And I realized, oh, shoot, I'm not gonna be able to get back the thing that I told this really important person I was gonna get back to them, and had to then navigate, "Okay, how do I do that? How do I tell them I'm gonna let them down?" And I couldn't keep my commitment, and what does that mean for me and the relationship, and am I gonna get fired, of course, was the
Yeah.
thought running through the back of my
Yeah,
brain.
that's been a persistent limiting belief that you have, Emily. That's yeah. As your current employment partner, I like that you're a little bit scared all the time, but yeah. But that's so, and I think many of us hit that wall, and I think we hit it multiple times at different levels in our career, right? Where you're like, oh yes, I can handle it all. I got it all. And it's just like, I started with this to do, and at the end of the day, it was all done and I had nothing left. And tomorrow's a new day, or at least it was planned out. And, as your skill grows, and as people recognize your skill, so does the demand, right? And so more things start coming your way. And then given the complexity of your role, the more things are uncertain and unscripted. So you talked about there was an emergency, there was an urgent request, there was an emergent request. And so if you're good at what you do, a sign of your success is that you reach a point where you're overloaded. And yet so many of us defined our success, at least early in our lives, by like, I got 100% on the test, right? I left nothing undone. I completed all of my assignments. I got all of my homework checked, and submitted. And like, that means I was a good student. I was a good kid. I was a good whatever. And then in life, you're now like, well, now there's 300% of your total capacity being demanded of you in this moment. And you're like, there's no freaking way. And yet then we feel bad. We beat ourselves up. We feel shame, right? There's guilt and like, oh, I told Skye I would get to that. And then now this other thing has happened. And how will I ever? And then I'm going to be fired. I'm going to let them down and I'm going to be no good. And so I'm highlighting that because I think for many of us, they think that's a sign that they're failing. And to me, that's the precondition to a level up, right? Because that means like for whatever reason, enough things are starting to come to you that you are trusted, you are seen as competent, you are desirable, you have a role that matters and has relevance. I mean, if you finish your day at 3 o'clock and you're like, I got nothing else to do but chill, you're not playing to your potential at all. So I think reframing that to see it as, yeah, I'm about to fail versus like, ooh, I'm about to level up. And then you do, and you come with a new system, and now you're able to handle three things at once. And then you hit a new wall, right? And then you're able to handle three more complex things. And so it just keeps scaling. I think, but we all go through that breakthrough moment. So I'm glad you pointed that out. Skye, what would you add to that? Maybe in your today's world, what are the moments where you start to feel overwhelmed and you're like, there's too many things, too much, all at once, everywhere. What does that look like for you in today's context?
Yeah, today's context, I think it's the moments where I realize my various hats are colliding. And so what that might look like is I'm in a project for one of our clients, super high visibility, compliance driven project, fires everywhere. I have IMs coming through from the client. And then I'm also trying to balance being a people lead where I have, individuals that I need to have one-on-ones with, or I need to, have direct conversations with, provide feedback, mentor. And then even further, I might have something that pops up from, being a practice family lead. And so it becomes that challenge of the multiple hats and being able to context switch and jump into, wherever the need is, if you have the bandwidth to stretch that far.
Yeah, yeah, and that's just during your workday. You add on top of that, you're a mom and you're a member of your community, and we volunteer for various nonprofits in the areas that we love. And that all they so it's just so many things start to collide. And Emily, how about you? What does that look like for you today? You cracked the nut back then, but then you've leveled up, and now you're like, wait, I'm right back here again. What's going on?
Yeah, yeah. I just forgot. I knew it. No, I'm just kidding. Um, I think when I think about the preconditions to know that when I need to prioritize, well, there's definitely a physical sensation where like I get hot, like my chest tightens up, and I'm just like, I can't do that. And I'm seeing an email, I'm seeing a phone call, I'm seeing something. And I think that's the mental piece then and the emotional piece, where it's just my first instinct is to say no. And I can't do this, and that's not possible. And when I start to have those thoughts of whatever's coming across my desk or my phone or what emails of that's not possible, I can't do that, I don't have time, I don't have bandwidth, I don't have whatever, like that's the indicator to me that I need to be thinking about critical micro prioritization.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And I love how you describe that sensation. You said it was a tightness in your chest. I think for some folks, it's a clenching of the jaws. It's a sweatiness in your palm. Your heart rate starts racing, and there's that sense of impending doom, right? You're like, I'm going to fail. This is going to crater. But yeah, fight or flight, 100%. Um, and when you're in that, so I think that's important to call it, because when you're in that state, are you gonna make the best judgment calls?
No. I'm gonna say, "Decline, can't do that," and I've done that, right? I've done all that where I'm just gonna I had this meeting on my calendar, I don't have time for that, I'm just gonna cancel, and I don't critically think through all the different factors that we'll, talk about in a little bit around how I could prioritize differently and make some smarter decisions for myself, my clients, and everyone else.
Exactly, exactly. So I think the first tip that we can offer our clients is to recognize that sensation, realize that is 100% human, right? That means you're in demand. And so to reframe that narrative from a moment of, oh crap, this sucks, I'm going to fail. All the other tips we share after that, you're not in a state where you can access those things. And you might get through it, but you're just surviving, right? You're literally in panic, fight or flight mode, and you're just trying to hold on. And maybe you get through it, but that doesn't mean it was the best it could have been for you or others around you. So I think the first thing is to be like, oh, to just recognize, like, okay, I am in an overload situation, right? And that means I've got options. That means I've got something of value that people want, and that's a good thing, right? And so, okay, now how strategically, how purposefully, how gracefully can I navigate this the best that I can, right? And I'm going to judge myself not on did I get it all done, because if you hold on to that level measure of success, you're screwed. Like, because you're not going to get it all done. It's like, let's start with acknowledging we're not measuring from this hypothetical parallel universe where you got it all done, because that doesn't exist. But the question is, how well did you do with what you had from where you were? That is the measure of your success. And I think that creates a bit of a stress relief valve, even in that moment. Right. And I know we've chatted about that a bunch. It's like, okay, now I'm in a state where I can make a conscious, and maybe the decision is I'm going to blow this person off and I'm going to tell that person to pounce down. I'm going to cancel this and I'm going to be like, it's not my problem, not my circus, not my, like those all become tactics, right? But doing it from a place of choice versus a place of panic, I think that's what we're really trying to shift here. So, so Skye, when you recognize that, let's zoom in here and look at a very specific kind of micro example, right? Because yes, we know the conditions are set when you're wearing multiple hats, you're working on multiple projects, you're dealing with multiple customer types. You know this is going to happen. But what is the specific moment where you're like, there is an actual task A and task B, and they're both wanting to happen at the same time? Could you elaborate on that pattern a little bit for us?
Yeah, so it often occurs kind of like what Emily said, you recognize you get that like stress level increase. I would say a specific example that I've encountered recently has been I had two projects that one I was specifically a part of, Project A. project B, I was kind of oversight on, right? So there was people doing that work. It was running smoothly. Project A, I'm deep in it. I'm meeting with clients, facilitating sessions, and project B blows up. I'm getting, I get a message from the client, that expectations are not being met on project B. And I go, oh, shoot, I really don't have the bandwidth to dive into this one and be present in a conversation with that, leadership team at that time for project B because I'm on project A. So specifically that came up, a couple of weeks ago, and it resulted in, how can I leverage my people in a more effective way and help mentor them to be able to handle the situation that occurred on project B, so I didn't have to be in two places at once. That was definitely a challenge, and it did end up ending smoothly, but it definitely took me having to calm down and kind of reflect on, all right, who can I quickly call that's on that project and have a conversation, coach them on what to do, what next steps to take, that I don't necessarily need to own that this is a great learning opportunity for them and allows them to step up.
Yeah, great. Well, you mentioned a variable to this we hadn't talked about yet, which is as a leader, we're all operating in three zones. There's the zone where like I'm still the doer. I don't care if you're a CEO, I don't care if you're the founder. There's time to like, this is my task. I am the accountable party, responsible party. I am doing the task. So you're the doer. Then you have the types of tasks where you're the collaborator, right? Like Emily and I are working together on this, or this other vendor and the client and I are working together on this. And so I'm a contributor, but I'm not the main gal, driving it. And then I have it where I'm getting work done through others, right? Like you kind of mentioned, you're like, I've got a delegated team that's handling that. I'm providing an oversight role. I'm providing supervision and guidance and boundary management, but I'm also point of escalation. So you map out your week and you're like, okay, here's the things I'm doing. Here's the things I'm collaborating on. Here's the things that, I need to be ready for an escalation. And you're like, cool, I've got 40 hours and I've allocated 40 hours. As long as nothing goes sideways, we're golden, right? And that's like every Monday ever. And by Monday at like 8:15, right, it just goes to hell. Yeah. Excellent. Excellent. Emily, what's the scenario for you that we could use as a basis for working through and troubleshooting the protocol?
Yeah, a recent one that came up for me, so there's so many variables to think through, so let's see which ones I can share that would be most useful. So this is similar to Skye, or actually, I think Skye, your example was on the same client. Mine is working with two different clients, and so that added variable of two different relationships. Maybe neither of them know I'm working with so there's a little bit of that there. One of them I've been working with for about 4 years, and the other one is very, very new. So the relationship is not built yet. It's some of the first working meetings. And for me, what the conflict looked like recently was very specific a meeting. So two meetings that are trying to compete for Emily's time at the same time on my calendar. Great. Who would have thought? They didn't check with me for. And so a lot of different dynamics went in of, one of the clients at some of their top executives, time is really a limited resource to be able to get from them. And the other one is, some of the new project sponsors. And it's like that first impression kickoff meeting, which meeting was scheduled for, like, we can get into all those dynamics,
Yeah.
but a bunch
Yeah.
of different variables in that instance.
Yeah, I like how you're bringing in the nuance of, yeah, you might have, there are two different projects, maybe with two different customers, right? And then you're like, well, it's not just I can go to that same customer and say, well, which of these two things is a higher priority? They're like, I'm the only thing in your universe, and it's me, and then like, but it's me, and you can't be like, oh, well, sorry, you're not as important today as Skye is, and you're like, what? Yeah, and then and it's a calendar impact. In this case, for Skye, it wasn't necessarily a meeting conflict because that's one type of a task, right? Be here, synchronously communicating, problem solving. The other one is it's asynchronous, but there's just too many happening at the same time. So a great setup to the pattern. So listeners, as we're going through the next set of, kind of this algorithm about how we reconcile and resolve it, we're sharing what we do in our context. Granted, we're a consulting agency, so, we're often either on a time and materials, or maybe it's a fixed fee. But there's an expectation of certain services or events or products and deliverables to be created, and that's how we eat. If we don't do those things, we don't get to bill for those things. So some of the things might not apply to your situation, but take what you can out of this next section, and think about it your own. I use some of these same principles when my wife, we have 4 kids, 2 are still at home, we're homeschooling, we're doing youth sports. So it's just like, who's getting who to soccer, and who's coaching football tonight, and who's going to make sure that we take care of the animals. In a family environment, there's still that kind of conflicting coverage, type of a challenge that might be relevant to you. So with that, let's dive in a couple of ways to not do it, because I think everybody hits this point in their career, and then and there's these natural go-tos that are they're devious, right? They're seductive. They're like, yeah, this seems like an obvious answer, but it makes the situation worse. And we've got a couple of acronyms for some of those, Emily and Skye. So let's cover those quickly. Let's start with FIFO. Okay. Hey, I got two. You mentioned it, right? 2 meeting requests. They both are looking for a 2 o'clock block on a Thursday. And FIFO, first in, first out. How would that algorithm solve that problem, and why could that be a really bad idea?
Yeah. So what I could have if I was using FIFO for this, it would have been, no matter what, whoever scheduled the meeting first, that's the meeting that I'm going to go to. Even if it's 11 o'clock for 15 minutes, someone wants me to come take notes, I'm going to do that over 11 to 1 strategic working session in person. Emily's the only one who can do it, but sorry, they scheduled first.
Yeah, first comes, and it has the illusion of equity and fairness, right? It's like, well, hey, I made that commitment first, so it's my word, it's my honor. And I'm not saying just, decline the initial one willy-nilly, but when you're making the decision, is like, am I having the highest and best impact with what I can for that moment? Don't just default to FIFO. Maybe that's a tiebreaker, maybe that's a factor, but, I like to use the analogy, if you're at the emergency room at the hospital, it's not FIFO, right? Like, I'm there first and I've got a hangnail. The person behind me is in the middle of a stroke. Like, absolutely, they should cut in line. And that's not unethical. That is being responsible and ethical to that situation. So now there's a protocol to how do you handle it? How do you communicate it? But yeah, that FIFO, so many folks are like, oh, sorry, you were not next. It's like, yeah, that would end badly in many of our scenarios. Skye, let's go to LIFO. LIFO is last in, first out. It's like and I also call it the latest is greatest. So we had this plan, but this thing just blew up, and it's the most recent, and it's the most urgent, and it's just in your face, right? So clearly you should go to the most emergency thing. So tell us about how that could end badly if you just drop everything else like it's hot every time something blows up.
Yeah, and in this scenario, it would have felt like the right thing to do is, we have a client that's upset on project B. We're not meeting expectations on that project. We need you to come in and, right the wrongs immediately. But I already had commitments on another project, which is probably as equally as challenging and important in the level of the compliance work that we were driving on project A. And there was already commitments set there. And so in this scenario, had I just dropped project A, there's a detriment to deadlines, there's a detriment to decisions being made. And so, that wouldn't have been the right scenario, because I probably would have missed, expectations on project A, and then it would have blown up.
And then
So
now it devolves into this crisis management, where, and it's a little bit of the, WSTL, whoever streamed the loudest, right? Like, I'm beating on you, and I'm saying, I need your attention, and by golly, I need to get it right now. And you're like, look, that's not the most urgent thing that we're dealing with, so those two can kind of, be kissing cousins of each other. Now, again, we're not saying just because it's an emergency doesn't mean it's like not my problem. Like, no, maybe that's a factor, right? Maybe if the person screaming at you is a high ranking official, and you're like, okay, maybe that's a factor. But the single factor prioritization techniques just don't work. It's like, I always do that and it's fair and that's it. And it's like, that's actually a very low fidelity way of prioritizing those conflicts. Um, and then let's cover this one that is kind of the default. And I've coached many leaders on this where they try to say, everything is the number one priority. You need to do everything everywhere all at once. I just saw that movie recently. Great movie, hilarious. And it's like, yeah, that's my life. But if you as a leader say everything's the number one priority and you need to just cover it all, there will come a break point where the employee, the team member, the person, the vendor will decide where it gives. And there is a very common place where they're going to decide what they do and what they don't do. And that usually lands on WSTE, whatever seems the easiest for them. So tell us about, what that looks like when you as a leader have tried to bully your way into 10 number one priorities and, get 80 hours of work done in a 40-hour sandbag. What does that look like when people default to whatever seems the easiest?
Yeah. I'll share a quick personal example and then I'll give a work one. But this is probably what my husband would say it's like to deal with me when we're about to leave for a trip. And I'm like, everything in the house needs to be clean and the litter box needs to be scooped and you need to do this and the laundry and the blah, blah. And then I'm like, okay, gotta go. And then it's, yeah, like if everything is equal priority and it all needs to get done and according to me in this certain time, I would do the same thing of whatever's gonna get done. It's just the thing that seems the easiest. So I'm gonna
Yeah.
lightly wipe the counters and then, save whatever for, if it doesn't get done, it doesn't get done. So that's what it looks like at home.
Yeah.
Um, and I
Yeah.
know I've definitely been guilty of that with my team,
And I'm
project
gonna
teams.
bet that
Yeah.
that kitty litter box is gonna be like,
What
oh
happened?
well, like that's gonna fall on the bottom of my list because I don't like dealing with that,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So,
You didn't
and I
power wash
and they
the
and they
desk?
might even spend all day like I polish the brass and I wipe down all the baseboards, or so they'll over index and do something that you didn't need as much, way past the point of diminishing returns. But they're like, but I'm good at it and I'm skilled at it, and I was clear about how to do it, and I knew I could be successful. And then they could say, but I was busy, I wasn't able to get to the litter box,
Yeah. Yeah,
right?
where I know I've done that with teams as well, I can think of a little bit recently where, there's some we need to put together a stakeholder register, we need to put together a project plan, and just a couple other things that, this team member's done before, knows how to do. And then we also need this visual that explains like the ecosystem view between the business architecture and like what, and they're looking at me like, what? And I'm like, well, it all needs to get done. Okay, so good luck. And come back and a shocker to me that the visual didn't get done. Like, who would have thought?
Yeah. Yeah, the thing that was scary and new and
Yeah.
uncertain, they
Yeah.
will
Really
fill their
ambiguous.
time doing other things to avoid doing that thing, but have the excuse that I was too busy, right? Yeah. So these are all, now that being said, is there a time and a place to do what we call the low-hanging fruit? You're like, we got 10 things to do. Let's at least knock a couple of these out because they are low-hanging fruit. They are easier. Sure. But the whole point of this is using any of these four, and there's probably others, um, is as your only solution to this problem is going to have suboptimal results, right? So we're looking to say, hey, how do we make a conscious choice from a state of powered and centeredness to make the best of a difficult situation? And that might be a blend of these factors, but it's not just any one of them. So Emily, you and I, when we were going through this a couple years ago, we created the first version of this SOP that we have internally. So let's break that down a little bit for our listeners. And again, listeners, you've got to make this your own. You might have other factors that we're not covering. You might have content. You like, we never have more than one customer working on, and like, okay, then fine, don't worry about that. But let's just chat a little bit about what some of the variables might be. So what's some of the first order criteria you're going to look at that we might not normally think about?
Yeah. I think just real quick before some of the variables of criteria to think about, like what our standard operating procedure offers me that those other prioritization principles don't is focused on what's the highest and best use. And so while all the things we're about to talk about are always in my head and what's the nature and required and substitute and blah blah blah, like I'm thinking about what's the highest best use of me, of our company, of the team. And so just wanted to like level set that.
That is a good way to describe it. Yeah, that's our highest and best use, and not just in the short term, We're also looking at to balance short term and the long term. So yes, this might suck in this moment. This might not be my preference. I might not like this, but given the circumstances, this is better than doing the alternative. And I know for me, my early career as an EMT, right? It's like I'm literally 911. I'm driving an ambulance and, there's three people at an auto accident or there's three calls on different parts of the town. And you're like, well, which do we called it triage back then. And then that's genuinely like you're making life or death decisions, as like a 20-year-old. How do you make those decisions on the fly really, really quickly? And you're like, it's about having the optimal survival rates. And so that's a little dire for what we're typically dealing with at most workplace environments. But at the end of the day, it's like, I may not like this, but this is the best, highest and best I can. So great
Yeah.
framing there.
Yeah. And so kind of the first variable or factor that I like to think about is on any given task, meeting, whatever the thing is ahead of me that my brain and my stress is saying I can't do this, is thinking about what's the nature of my contribution to this task
Hmm.
or to this meeting, to this client commitment, fill in the blank. And thinking of that in terms of, am I required, am I desired, or am I optional? And really thinking through, like, they sound similar, and like desired, isn't that the same as optional? What do they mean? But I know, especially at UL, we're very specific about how we use any of those terms. Like, and highest first, right? Required is required. Like, if it's a meeting, I'll go back to my example that I was sharing, my client example. Yeah. If this person does not show up, we will not have the meeting. Like, we will cancel, we will not go. And so that list is always, I was going to say often, but it's always smaller than you think it
Tiny.
is.
Yeah, tiny.
Yes, very,
And
very
Outlook
tiny.
and Outlook has the required and optional in the invite, right? But we make that distinction. That's required is if that person's not there last minute, you would cancel and reschedule versus try to muster on. That's a high standard.
Yeah, and I'll say especially in the consulting space I found, but likely anywhere, like, it's a really good ego check for me to be like, "Am I actually required? Can this meeting go on without, could they still get some traction? Could it lead to the next meeting? Do I really," thinking through that is always really helpful.
Good. And then what's desired? How do you differentiate that from required?
I think about it as, I mean, the step under required, where like, gosh, it'd be really nice if you could come because maybe you have some subject matter expertise, an opinion that we really want. You need to, it would be really helpful for you and your other project. You could hear this, but we're not going to not have the meeting if you can't make it.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah, you're gonna add or the task would be enhanced somehow if you got your eyes on it. But if we didn't get your eyes on it, we're accepting some risk, but it would probably still be better than not doing anything. Right. What were we gonna add on to that, Sky? I'm sorry, was it Sky or was it Emily? Oh, my bad. Okay, thank you. And I'll get you to jump in here in a second here, Sky. So sorry. Emily, by the way, you guys are doing a great job. You're flowing, your stories are relevant, you're articulate, you're speaking from a place of power and confidence. So I'm just sitting here very proud of both of you right now. So just know that you're rocking it. This is going to be
Thank
great.
you. I appreciate that. I was just gonna finish with optional. I kind of, that's almost like we would use like an FYI on an email. Sometimes there's folks that are like, "Gosh, it'd be nice to have this information," or just like if you come, if you don't, I'm not gonna follow up. Like, it's all good. You either make it or you don't.
Yeah, yeah. And that kind of relays into we have a separate SOP on how do you make calendar requests. And we make that part of our standard that if you're asking somebody to show up for a meeting, you're letting them know in the body of the email, you're required, desired, and optional. So if they've got five, we work with EAs with, top level executives and they're, spread super thin, like you were talking about. And you're like, well, the EAs, and if the EAs, the executive assistants, if they just go on first in, first out, it's like, well, you have this trivia one-on-one and like, here's a mission critical, $200 million grant. They're like, oh my God, right? Like, but help the EAs by declaring what it is. And then if I'm the recipient, I'm looking at it, I'm like, hey, Skye needs me here. Emily needs me there. Same time, if I see like, hey, Emily was like, Lee, I was just doing as a courtesy. You didn't even look at my calendar. You just stomped it and said, come if you can. Skye's like, Lee, you gotta be there. This doesn't happen. So then that helps people make those decisions. Now that's a company norm that we have to declare that. Not everybody's going to do that, and not all of our clients do that. But we work on it, when we're working with our scheduling.
Yeah. and valuable past just scheduling too, Sky. I think that goes to the example you were sharing about of when, this other project, someone's screaming, do I do something? Could I empower someone else? And like, is it required that I'm the one to take this next action or could somebody else do it?
Hmm. Well, and Sky, maybe you can speak to that. So the next factor is like, okay, what's the nature of my contribution? The second one is to what degree is a substitute, sufficient and available. So it may not be the best if Lee does it and when Sky could have done it better, and that's what you kind of had in that oversight situation. So could you elaborate a little bit on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the importance here is really, like you said, empowering others to be able to learn and grow in those scenarios and trusting that, you've given them the skills to be able to handle, whatever that thing is. And so in the scenario, of project B, I ended up calling the project lead, the person that, is generally doing all of the oversight for that project, and said, "Hey, we have the leadership team it has this complaint that we're not meeting expectations, that our project approach doesn't make sense anymore. I just need you to call them and have a one-on-one conversation and clear this up. Did we go sideways? What is the scenario?" In those scenarios, it's like, yeah, I want to, my ownership and my, sometimes it's hard for me to trust others, and that's just my own, my own challenge to overcome. Yeah, that's a whole other thing. But it's like, this person can do this. I wouldn't have asked them to be the lead on this work if I didn't trust that they had the ability to build relationships with people and to really, iron out wrinkles when they happen like this. And so, and if say they do it and it does flop, you can always clean it up. I mean, that then it's okay. I'll make the phone call, but at least allowing that opportunity for them to step in because I didn't have the bandwidth right then, allowed for the client to get their needs met. So,
There you go. So that's an example where maybe something's being escalated to you because they trust you, because they know you would take care of them. They know this wouldn't have happened had you been there. And that again, that's a compliment. Most of these things, when people show up grumpy and they're talking to you, I like that a lot better than somebody being grumpy and not talking to me. Right. So they're giving you the option to engage. And to your point, it might not be so far gone that maybe with some coaching and some reaffirming, right, you can get that person to own the mistake, clean it up, and rebuild that relationship and those results. Now, it might be that it's too far gone, and you're like, look, I know they have tried a couple of times. It is a dumpster fire now. I absolutely need to get me or somebody else to do it. But again, even here, it may not be you. Maybe you're like, hey, Emily, could you come over and help us clean this up? Because I know you have some working knowledge of it. And maybe that's exactly the opportunity that was on Emily's career development plan to be able to demonstrate, like, we know Skye can handle it, right? She's done 100 of these. Let's get some reps in, some repetitions in for some other folks. So I look at this as not only a prioritization factor, but it's also a way of expanding your capacity as a leader. Because if the answer is, I have to do it myself, or it's better if I do it myself, that is a dangerous drug. And at the moment you said that, you've kind of given up the leadership chase. So yes, you might have to, but let's not just assume that because they asked for it, it was needed for it.
Yeah. And Lee, the flip side of that too, I know Sky and I talk about this a lot of on the subject of viable substitutions where she and I will get as project leads. If you're a person listening to this and you're on a team and you're the one that's constantly getting so many things thrown at you and I can't do it, it is so much better to come to your project lead, your manager, and whoever, and not just say, no, I can't do that. I have a conflict, or no, I'm not available, but instead be the one to proactively here's the conflict I have at this time. There's one substitute that I see. Here's what do you think about that? Would that work? And so it's so easy for your project lead, your manager, whoever, your client, just to say, yep, all good.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. There, you want to bring some options. You may not know all of them, but offer some, you know, absolutely. So that's starting to think like a team member, starting to think like a leader, not just an individual contributor. All right. So those are some things that have to do with, like, the nature of your contribution, the types of skills and competencies needed. So let's switch into a couple of time sensitivity factors. So, there's all, maybe, you're the only one. There can only be one Emily. It's got to be you, right? And both of them are like, man, there's just no viable options. And so now we start looking at some time sensitivity factors, right? So let's talk a bit about, the sensitivity of the task, the critical path nature. So let's walk through some of those factors. Skye, could you expand on, what you talked about, one of them being an emergency, right? Like this really just blew up. So that can have the illusion that it's more time sensitive because it's more recent. But how in that case, how did you look at it and say, no, legitimately that was more time sensitive because we're going to miss a window here, even if we jack up this other one that was planned, it was on smooth sailing. So how do you make that critical path urgency determination in a situation like that?
Yeah, that is pretty challenging when you're facing, two projects that may both have timelines. I would say project A in my scenario was I was facilitating a discussion to get to a deliverable due date by the end of the week, right? And so it was like I have 3 days to get, four different areas in the room together, agree on content, and have this thing packaged so that it's ready to go out the door, by the end of the week. Project B, it's like it feels time sensitive because there's emotion tied to it, but, there's a little more wiggle room to say, "Hey, let us figure this out. We'll get right back with you and we're going to fix this. I promise that this is going to get put back on track." And so it kind of allows you to give a little bit more leeway in the time frame. It's like it's still important. You still got to address it right away. You don't want it to linger. But, if you think about, like you said, critical path, it's like I have a clear deadline due on this thing. I don't know that there's somebody else that could facilitate this conversation and bringing all these people together. And, project B, I could find somebody else to potentially do that. And we don't have a deadline at the end of the week.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
just we got
Yeah.
to fix it.
It took a while for this problem to happen. Now that it's happened, it's going to take a little while to land. So, let's put it in perspective. It goes back to your lack of planning that created a crisis does not create necessarily, a problem for me. Now with clients and different clients, yes, in that case, yeah, you're my firefighter. It does create a problem for you. Um, but being able to say like, yes, that's emergent and it's happening. But this, I to use a fire example, yes, there is a kitchen fire over here, but it's going to take a little while before it, spirals out of control. Over here, this isn't on fire yet, but if it blows, it's a chemical plant. It wipes out half the city. So it's kind of like, yes, that one's further along, but it's a slower roll. This one might not seem so emergent, but the magnitude of it is pretty big. So I think that's another way of kind of evaluating, both the urgency and the magnitude of the impact. Should we not deal with it right now? Again, that sensitivity, that's just another variable to take into your calculation. I'm not saying one is right, one is wrong, but those are questions to ask. And Skye, it occurred to me, we're saying things like critical path, like everybody knows what it is. Could you just give a good working definition of how, if you're working on a project, why would one task be considered critical path and another one is not? Like, what is that distinction? I can't assume that everybody knows that.
Yeah, I would say the critical path is what gets you from point A to point B, and so it's really the steps you need to take in order, so that you can arrive at some kind of something executed or something delivered. So it may be a series of steps, it may be a couple steps, but it's these things have to recur simultaneously, one after the other, to get to this end game.
Yeah.
Whereas,
And if one of them doesn't, that end game is either not met or is pushed out day for day, right? Like there's an immediate correlated impact. Yeah. Versus a thing that could be done in parallel, right? That it could be done this day, it could be done that day. It doesn't have to be on this sequential, simultaneous schedule, in which it just needs to be done by this point. But we've got what's called slack, right? A little bit of room in between. Yeah. And not everybody knows if their task is on the critical path because it sounds like a sophisticated PM technique, and it is to really figure it out. But intuitively, you're just kind of like, if I miss this window, what's the domino effect? right? And it's like, if I miss this window, I just do it tomorrow and nobody really notices. If I miss this window, I'm rescheduling 15 people. We blow our Friday date. We don't get to hit this again until next October.
Yeah,
You're like,
because in Project
that was on the
A,
critical path.
yeah, because in Project A, I was dealing with leadership teams, and when you have so many leaders in one meeting that their schedules are conflicted, you're dealing with their next open collectively is probably a week or two from the date that we have it scheduled, and so the impact
Yeah.
of rescheduling wouldn't be like, hey, let's do it again tomorrow. It would be,
Mhm.
let's push this out now another week or two.
Yeah, exactly. And again, the person may not like it. It may not, be their ego. It might be really inconvenient. We're not saying this is our preference. We're saying, given the options, it's better to do this than it is to do that. Right. And once we cover a few more factors, we'll talk about, okay, these are factors for you to run through your algorithm, and then you land at a decision. I'm going to reschedule this one. I'm going to put this one in front. How do you then communicate it? So we're just for our audience, you guys are like, okay, that's great, but how do you let them know? The first thing is you got to figure out what it is you want to let them know, and why you're doing it in your own mind before you can effectively communicate it to others. So then let's just what are some of the tiebreakers? If we get through all of these, like, you're essential, they're both critical path, they're most time sensitive, they both have a ton of visibility to, a major launch window for a customer release or to some elected official who's going to rip your head off if they don't get what they want, right? They're like, you're like tie, 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 tie. All of these are tying out, and you're like, okay, Lee, what do I do now? What are a couple of tiebreakers that a person could look to? So, Emily, let's talk a little bit about
Sure.
the committed one, right? And then let's talk about just overall relative
Yeah.
project priority.
Yeah, the committed one's my favorite as just a person who likes to live and die by her calendar. It's also got me in trouble many times because of all the other prioritization principles we've talked about. But if all things are the same in all of the ways that you just talked about it, I can fall back on what did I commit to first, right? And so it's the same level. I have to be there both at the same time. Can't move critical path. Sorry, I committed to this one first. This is the one that I'll be attending.
Yeah. And
Simple
that
one.
messaging, and again, it said, well, wait, I thought you said don't do FIFO. We're just saying don't do FIFO first. We're saying use it later in the stack when you're like, okay, I've already, because you might have a slight adjustment. Emily, could I move our one-on-one up a half an hour? Even though we scheduled that a year ago, but that's going to allow me to get a one-on-one with a client, and that's the only time they can meet, right? You're not going to be like, well, Lee, how dare you? You disrespected me. Well, you probably do anyways, but you're going to take it a lot better. Yeah, exactly. And then the communication I like to, in that case, is to say, hey, Emily, I respect that you're asking for me to move this into the slot. Respectfully, I committed to this to Skye, and her situation is just as dire and critical. And if the roles reversed, I would be deferring to you as well, so that you could plan your stuff accordingly. And I find that even when I have different clients, and I don't necessarily have to say what the client is or what the reason is. They're like, when I have a prior commitment that at this point I've explored the option of moving it and it is just not viable. So with respect to them, the same I would be respectful to you. That's not an option for me. And I've only once in 25 years have had somebody throw a full blown tantrum at that point. But I was just like, well, that is what it is, man. So that's a good one. And then Skye, for you as a executive team member, you've got visibility across multiple accounts with multiple customers, with multiple levels of revenue and referability impacts. So if you got a person that's struggling between the two of them and you're allocating the resources, what's a tiebreaker there if the task is all critical path, same urgency, everything else? What do you look to there in terms of overall priority?
I think it's the value add to the client usually is another thing that I would kind of balance against. So I really like Emily's first, probably the first one would be, one of my options too, of like, hey, they scheduled that first and everything else is tied, you got to do what you got to do. However, if like that was kind of not the approach you wanted to take, another thing could be of like, what's the value add to the client in terms of what I'm delivering in this meeting? Maybe, you know, the value add somewhere is like, well, maybe there's a customer impact or like, there's some kind of like really
some
clear.
intangible
Yeah.
variable, right? That just says this is going to feel worse if we don't do this. Yeah. And that can be, but isn't necessarily tied to, how big is the account? How big is the project? So I think a lazy way of doing it is like, some agent is deployed 50% on project A, 50% on project B. Project A is a mega account. It's massive. It's complex. It's gnarly. It's a game changer for the business. Project B is a smaller, tiny little whatever. You're like, well, don't just always defer to the big dog, because again, maybe the task on the smaller project, that is critical path. You're more essential here. Over there, it's a trivial impact to them. This is one of 10,000 things that need to happen. They're barely going to notice it, or nope, they're both visible. Well, then yeah, let's not jeopardize the big project for one of a tiny little project. So I think it's just, again, looking at the nature of the comparison, and that kind of, what is the impact? What is the value to it? So those are all great variables to consider. And generally, I kind of like to look at them more or less in that order, right? Before I start looking at macroeconomic relative marginal benefit, I look to, am I really needed for this or not? Right? So start with what's the nature of your role. Start with looking at alternatives. Start with making a little bit of schedule adjustments so that you can get both of them covered. And then the tiebreakers end up being kind of who got there first and what is the macroeconomic significance of this thing. And then that's the one you go with. And you're never perfect, but hopefully it's better. All right. So now you've landed. All right. So, and we'll walk through both of yours, and you've kind of started to allude to it already. So, Emily, in your case, two conflicting calendar requests. One was made first, but maybe wasn't critical path and is significant. This other newer one is kind of like, yeah, this is the one. All right. How do you communicate to, and then you said there were different clients. So how do you communicate that decision in a respectful way that honors your integrity and the relationship?
Yeah, just real quick, I think even before coming to the decision on this one, the element of humility, I guess is the best way I could put it, was really critical to know that I couldn't make the decision on my own, right? I thought I had. Did you know? Yeah, yeah. I thought I had an idea that like of what might be higher priority, of what I thought my role was, where I thought the higher impact, but always wanting to vet those with my project teams. And so that's what I did in both instances. Okay, hey, well, here's what I'm thinking. If there are any, holes in that, please let me know. And so after
And
that was kind
if there's options that they see that you're not seeing, well, don't you realize that, Allison would be great at that, and she's been dying to do that. And you're like, didn't even think of Allison. Yeah, yeah.
And so in this instance, what happened was the meeting that ended up by all the factors, and I think most importantly, the nature of my specific contribution, it was the highest and best use of my time to go to the new client thing, which was scheduled later, but I was kind of in a engagement manager capacity, important to start to build some of these relationships versus meeting scheduled a long time ago, really key, like high up C-suite, folks, but someone else on the team could fill in that had, met some of the key folks. I could prep her ahead of the call. And so in that instance, it was a matter of figuring out, okay, like what goes through my head? Is this a Teams message conversation? Is this a meeting? Do I pick up the phone, letting them know, meeting on this date, not going to be available to serve in the capacity. This was like a project manager capacity that they were looking. So to take notes, make sure things stay on track. We're going to put, so-and-so in the meeting instead. She's, very familiar with some of the different tools. I'll prep with her ahead of time. If there's anything else you'd like me to make sure that she knows, please let me know. Let me know if you have any concerns, and giving them an opportunity. Because I have had that happen where, yeah, I do have concerns. We told you it was a PM like role but we actually wanted you to facilitate. We just didn't tell you until now. And then, okay, now let's go back to the cycles of prioritization again.
Yep, yep. And that's where you spend more time talking about what you're going to do to take care of them. It's not, you don't have an obligation to justify all the reasons why and say, well, let me tell you, this other client, they're really in a bind. And it's like, I mean, I might, if I've got like two coaching requests that are happening, I might be like, hey, I've got another person, they are really in a bind and they could use this time. Are you okay? And I do it very rarely. Right. But, you can allude to that, but, don't be like, well, because the other person doesn't care. They're like, that's not my problem. You know, uh, the, so I want to meet you. This is how I'm going to meet your need. And it's a pick up the phone situation in that place, right? So they feel respected and heard, right? So excellent. Yeah, so the channel is almost as important as the message, right? Is this a text? Is this a Teams? Is this a call? Great example. All right. And then Skye, for your situation, how did you communicate to the respective parties?
Yeah, so in this scenario, I actually didn't even contact Project A. I had already made the decision that's like, I'm gonna make sure that we, facilitate that meeting and that the deliverables are met. But on Project
So
B,
there's no change for them then. So
yes,
they were none the wiser. Yep.
yes. So Project B, though, I did reach out to two leaders via Teams. I said, hey, I understand that there's issue occurred. We're working on it. I will, Muck, another employee, will be in touch with you, as soon as possible so that we can work out, what the contingency plan is moving forward. And so that was really a quick Teams meeting. And then I called, the project lead. I said, hey, here's some coaching tips. I need you to call them right away. I need you to get on the phone. This is not in this scenario, it wasn't a email or Teams. And we need to talk, virtually, face to face, whatever possible, and, understand where they're coming from, what the challenges are. This is what I think is occurring. So this is my diagnosis of it. Don't go off of that. Let's listen to them first. And really kind of figure out how do we then right the wrong and, apologize, take full credit, whatever it is, and just get it back on track.
Yeah, and I think just owning it, and declaring like, "Hey, I apologize for the inconvenience. I know this is not optimal. This is not desired. I'm doing my very best to be of service to everybody here, and know that I would do the same for you." Those are the types of things that even if they don't like it, you have at least said, "I'm showing up with honor," because the alternative is this. I mean, I have had this conversation with some clients at times where they're like, "Hey, I want the budget option, right? I want to have less money and committed, so less time allocated, and I need it when I need it, right?" And that's fine. And then we have other folks that are like going, "Hey, I am going to I'm going to pay a premium to reserve your time, so I know I have it when I need it." And I use the analogy sometimes of it's kind of like a firefighting team. And it's like, if your priority for this engagement or this customer type is responsiveness, like when I call, it has got to be now, then you have to buy buffer. Like, you can't just say, and then when I call, I only pay for the time I use. Like, you don't get to cut it both ways. So for firefighters, in EMTs and police officers, like we pay for them to be on call. And it's not like they're not getting paid when they're on call and they're not fighting fire. We don't just say, "Okay, well, you're fighting a fire, now we're going to pay you." It's like, no, we paid them whether they're on a fire or not. And so if I have a client that needs that level of time sensitivity responsiveness, then they've got to pay for some buffer, right? But if somebody wants the budget, it's like, "Well, I only want to pay for it when I need it." Well, then the natural trade-off is like, okay, you're going to get a better price. It's not going to be expensive, but maybe I didn't have to fit you in. But I like to negotiate those trade-offs up front when I'm onboarding a client, right? So it's like, "Hey, I got the budget option, but I expect premium responsiveness." And I'm like, "Well, if you want that, your price just quadrupled, because I now have to pay for time to reserve, even if you don't use it, in order to be available when you need it." And I think that kind of negotiation up front. So then when it happens, like, "Oh, hey, I need you right now." It's like, "Okay, well, my next availability is Thursday." And they're like, "What the heck?" And it's like, "Well, if you want to buy for Tuesdays and Thursdays to be ready whenever you need it, that's a different conversation." And I think it's important to level set those expectations early in a relationship like that as well. And that would apply to, like, accountants and attorneys and people like that. Maybe not some of the other trades that are out there, but it's, that might depend on your industry. Well, excellent, team. So one last thing I'd like to cover is, we're talking about when there is a conflict, right? Project A, Project B, something's an emergency. Emily, client A, client B, conflicting task requests. But how do you handle it when you know a conflict is coming, but it hasn't hit yet? Right. And so this is a scenario where you're like, we know we're going to have a surge of stuff hit in like 3 weeks or 2 months or whatever, but I don't know exactly when it's going to hit. I just know we need to be ready for it to hit. So can you guys relate to that scenario? Is that ringing a bell with either of you?
Never. No, I'm kidding.
Never happens. Yeah, I know. Try to fabricate one quickly,
That's a
Emily,
new
since the
one.
last one
Yeah.
happened.
I I'll go just really quick, Skye. I think just a couple, like really tactically for me, if I know that's coming. Actually, I just had this happen. We did a critical path prep right before this call where we need to do this really big report to all the C-suite, whoever's at the company, September 1st. Okay, whatever. September's so far from now. I don't need to worry about that at all, you know? That's what are we gonna do? Yeah. Yeah. And so being aware of some of those like high level commitments and the work that will go into them. And so constantly, I'm not prepping my schedule Mondays for every single minute, but on a regular basis, whatever that looks like for you, what are some of the really high level deliverables or commitments that I need to keep? And the prep needed to keep each of them on the critical path. And so what we did was we sat down and mapped out, all right, we'll need this approval from, the directors by then. And so then their people by then and their people by then. And wow, that means we have to start next week. I should
Mhm.
probably put a little bit of calendar time to
And
protect some
two of them
time
are
for
on
myself.
vacation for the next week, so you're like, wait a minute, can't just assume they can see it and sign off.
Yeah.
Great example, Emily. Like I said, I knew if you stretched, you could find one. And there was one from 15 minutes ago. So awesome. Sky, what do you do to handle that kind of, anticipation of a conflict, but you can't quite say, well, no, cancel everything just yet, right? So how do you
Right.
juggle that?
Yeah, I think it's really planning in time to consider that there's stepping stones that you need to build to get to that, whatever the event is when, before it happens. And I think this goes back to wait being one of Unleashing Leaders' bad words because, our philosophy is that you should never wait. You shouldn't be waiting for that event to occur. You shouldn't be waiting for, somebody to respond to you. You should always be anticipating that there is these things that need to be done and we'll be ready for them when they come. And so in terms of, prioritizing that, I think making sure that you carve out time within your week, within your day that even if it's just 30 minutes that you can focus on whatever that task is or, ask your team to also do the same of like, hey, we need to fit in time to make sure we're creating a buffer for this thing to occur because I see it happening. It's coming. And so, just being able to plan around that and know that you've got to always save yourself some time in your week to do the tasks that maybe aren't emergencies, right? Not everything has
Unscripted.
to be a
Yeah.
fire.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So yeah, and that literally looks like putting working time blocks on your calendar, and maybe you color code those, in my case with my EA, she knows like, hey, I need some time. Please give me some heads down time. So it's not all just nights and weekends. I'd like to be able to do this during the day, please. Thank you very much. So I can have a life. So blocking those things out, but then also realizing, oh, something just came up. You're like, okay, could I move that now, or do I really need to stick with that? And it's never perfect, but like you said, I think as you start to get your prioritization skills up to snuff for a certain level of work, being able to start to look out ahead and plan ahead, like you said, don't wait for it to come to you. Be proactive, schedule in advance, send to the person that you need to review, send a calendar request to them so it's on their calendar to do it that day. Let them know, hey, this is coming in 2 weeks. So, when you need it, now they suddenly drop what they're doing and they now have to prioritize. Your lack of planning does not create a crisis on my part kind of example. So great tips. Well, both of you have been incredibly helpful. This episode's a little on the longer side because we're going a little deeper. And of course, we had two guests. But some parting thoughts on when you start to do this, how did that just make rainbows and butterflies in all parts of your life and you never have stress anymore? Tell everybody the promise of being good at this. What can they expect when they start to get better at this?
Mm, it'll happen quickly. For me, it's just the cycles will get shorter. You won't have to have your piece of paper that says, "Am I required? What is the impact?" Right? And so the cycles will get quicker. And then
Well,
just
in all
the
fairness,
other.
there was a time where you were leveraging that, right? It's like you you put it on your screen, so you're like, I can look at it and see it. Yeah, that's why we wrote it.
Yep. And so the cycles between will get quicker. And I think just until then, the other piece I would offer is don't go it alone, right? Like these are things that are fluid. And I know I never see the full picture. And there's nothing wrong with that, right? Sky will have more information than I do. Lee will have a little bit here. And so to make some of these really dynamic and complex decisions, I can't just do it in a bubble.
Great. What about you, Skye? What's
I don't know
been
if I
some
could
of the
say it any
results?
better, but you it does become easy. I mean, it does help you reduce some of the stress of trying to own everything. And I think even what we, said at the beginning of the call with, you are typically going to leave your day with some things not done, and that's okay.
If you're any good at what you do, you're going to leave. That means demand is exceeding supply, which means there's now room for growth. If supply exceeds demand, that is the definition of contraction.
Or I think as somebody told me, long ago, maybe it was Cyrus, you are juggling multiple things and you just have to know which balls you literally cannot drop, because some of them you can put down for a moment. But those ones that you can't, you gotta keep juggling those.
Yeah, some are made of glass, some are made of rubber, some are made of metal. So that one's going to fall, it's going to hit, it's going to hurt, but it'll live. This one will bounce for a while, you not even notice it. This one will shatter and be a lot of work to put it back together. So that is a great. Well, I will. Here's one closing comment for me to that you just pointed out. Another thing not to do is to try to multitask. So I think for many years, the idea was like, well, if you just do two things at the same time, then you can do more, right? But, and at least for me, I cannot do that. All right. You guys, have some different brain hardware. Maybe you're better at it than I am. But, like I can do two or three low risk, low complexity things at the same time. Right. But I cannot do two high complexity, high neural content things like that's just silly. So I think the other thing is once you decide that you're going to prioritize something, let it go. Right. So like I'm in the meeting now. I chose to make my meeting with Emily the priority. When I'm in the meeting with Emily, I am present with Emily and I am fully committed to making this the best. If I'm going to make the sacrifice to be here, give it its due. But I don't want to spend the whole time feeling bad and be like, well, Sky's really mad at me right now. Maybe I can text her on the side really quick. And, I'll just do this little thing while, Emily's. And I'm like, well, then I screwed both of you. So it's like own the prioritization and be focused. And maybe it's for 2 minutes. Maybe it's for 10 minutes. Maybe it's make the meeting shorter, 15 minutes, get in, get out. Maybe another task trick was like, yeah, I need to do this and I need to focus. Set a timer. I'm going to work on this for 5 minutes. I'm going to, because I can get sucked into this email for the next 4 days, right? I'm going to give 5 minutes to this particular email. I'm going to give it my very best. And then I'm hitting send. And then I'm going to come up and see the other 200 that have come in since then. Like, so those little, being focused, singular threaded in the moment, and then slicing to the next thing is way better than trying to do three balls at the same time. That just doesn't fly, at least in our nature of work. Well, excellent. Well, thank you both for what you do for our customers, for what you do as fellow employee owners. You are helping us to grow not only a great company for the benefit of our clients and the projects we work on, you're also modeling the way so that our junior associates and even some of our senior ones that are learning how to expand their impact can make good prioritization decisions on the fly. I really, really appreciate what you guys do for us. So thanks for being on the show.
Thank you.
Glad to be here. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us today on the Unleashing Leaders podcast. Subscribe so you don't miss a moment that could be the key to your next breakthrough. Let's stay connected and contribute together by grabbing that @Unleashing Leaders handle on LinkedIn, YouTube, or your favorite network. This is Lee Scott. Keep learning, loving, and leading. Our future and our communities are counting on us.